Hello. So Marielle here with Romanced by the Book, and we're with Tawna Fenske. If you've been following us all month, we have been reading The 2-Date Rule, which was super fun. It was Willa, who is very cautious and has a rule that she doesn't go out with anyone more than twice because she needs to focus on her business and working, and she can't be distracted by things. And she meets this guy who's kind of a hero firefighter. They have a specific name.
Smoke jumper.
Yeah. And so he's like super reliable, but also not reliable at all because his job takes him away for long periods of time. And he decides that like a lot of things that they do together are not really dates. So they end up breaking the rule on technicalities, I guess, for a lot of this book. It was really fun. And also you got some really kind of interesting and like deep kind of characterization and kind of serious topics in there, I feel like, even though the book was really fun to read.
That's what I love, writing romantic comedy. I mean, that's obviously what I'm known for, but I like kind of mixing in the heartache with the humor so that it's kind of blending of both things. Every now and then I'll tell somebody like, here's what my next book is about. Yeah, there's alcoholism or divorce or infidelity or death. Or like I lay pretty serious topics into romantic comedies, and I like being able to strike that balance.
Yeah, I thought it was really a good mix. Like I like the idea that just because, well, I mean, real life is like that too, right? Sometimes we're laughing at stuff and it's awful, but we're just like, well, what do? You have to see the humor in it. Have you always, like, is that always a thing that you've tried to inject into your books?
Often. So when I first started trying to break into writing fiction, I'd been a journalist and I worked in marketing for a long time, but it's been maybe 15 years-ish since I first started trying my hand at fiction. And it took a while to get in, to kind of break in. So I sold my first book to a line that doesn't exist anymore at Harlequin called Bombshell. And it was like a women's action adventure. And there was a little bit of humor in there. But on my, I think it was like my 30s.
Are they more like romantic suspense books then?
Well, kind of. It was like kick-ass heroines, it was billed as like this women's action adventure. So it didn't do very well. And on the day, they ended up canceling the line 1 month before my scheduled debut. I'd already spent the advance and everything. So the day I got the call that they were canceling the line was the same day my cat died. And I was told at my day job that if I continued to disobey the company's hosiery policy, I would be terminated.
The what policy?
So, but this was like all on the same day. And I remember walking out onto my back deck with a glass of wine and being like, I mean, it's actually kind of funny that all of this is happening at one time. And then I think that was kind of a catalyst for me in realizing like, okay, if I can find the humor in this, what is arguably one of the worst days of my life, then maybe there's something to that. And that was actually kind of my big segue into attempting to write humor. I ended up getting an agent and yeah, the rom-com thing took off from there.
Yeah. Well, and I guess 15 years ago doesn't sound like rom-com was probably like front and center in publishing, but now it's very kind of hot as far as things that are being published like currently go.
Back in the day, we'd hear over and over from editors and publishing houses like, we don't know what to do with this, we don't know how to market it. There just wasn't a lot of rom-com happening. There's Jenny Cruzy and Kristen Higgins was still pretty new on the scene, I think, then, but there just wasn't a lot of romantic comedy. And now it's like, it's huge. I can't write fast enough to get all these books out, but back in the day, nobody was really quite familiar with the concept for novels anyway.
Yeah, well, I think it works really well. And okay, so I have a question, because a lot of the people who follow us, or at least some degree, some of them are writers or working on becoming writers. What happens if you have received an advance and you have a contract and they fold? I mean, is that in the contract?
Good question. Yeah, so that was At that point, I was going it without an agent because you could you'd still sell the Harlequin without an agent. Luckily, the contract said I got to keep my advance, so they reverted the rights to those books back to me because I'd written one that was under contract, a second one that was scheduled to be the second one, and it hadn't gone to contract yet, and was already like halfway through a third one when they canceled the line. So I was kind of out on my butt with these 3 books that I didn't really know what to do with.
Yeah.
But yeah, I had already spent the advance traveling around Australia and Fiji for a month. So luckily,
for research, right?
Right. Luckily, Actually, you know what? I just realized this. The third book in that series that I had not quite gotten through was a smoke jumper, and I had done a lot of the research. Although I ended up having to redo the research because 15 years had passed. So
yeah, that's kind of funny. I guess things are cyclical sometimes. So the characters in this book are, it was interesting to me that you kind of, I guess, I've heard some writers say, like, find the person who's like the very worst soulmate you could find. And I thought that in this book, it was like they were perfect for each other. And also, yeah, the very kind of worst, like people who would poke at the places that these guys were trying to ignore, right? Because Willa seemed very like determined to keep everything under control, and that if she could just like put her head down and work and achieve these the really kind of specific milestones for herself, that was gonna make life good. But it didn't seem to have like any end point. It was just like she was gonna do that forever.
yeah.
And she has her friends, but that's kind of it as far as like people she lets in. And he's kind of the opposite. He's got this whole family. Everyone's really close, but they all have this smoke jumping job where it's like they may never come back from this one. Any time that they go out, they might never come back. So they don't seem to be big planners or big, either. I mean, this is like a good job for the moment, but
Yeah.
once that's over, there's nothing. So neither one of them really have like an exit to where they're at right now.
Yeah.
Did you start off
interviewing the smoke jumpers? Like that was one of the things that a lot of them talked about is it is kind of a young person's job. And there were some older guys that I talked to on the crew, but it was like, this beats your body up pretty bad, and you do have to kind of start to plan for what am I going to do when I can't jump anymore. So, but that was not something Grady was really able to do, at least in the early parts of the story.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it seems like one of those jobs that's like really exciting if you don't think about the scary bits, I guess. And so if you're going to plan for future things, you have to look those things dead in the eye, basically.
Yeah.
Did you plan for them to kind of oppose each other that way from the beginning?
I do like writing that kind of setup where you've got one character who has a lot of things together in his or her life, but there's this area he or she needs to work on, and the character that they're paired with is somebody who might have that component of their life together, but the thing they need to work on is something the other. So kind of everybody brings something to the table and everybody gives a little and compromise in the end. And I don't tend to like setups where like one person has to do all the changing or growing. I like where there's a meeting of the minds and a meeting in the middle that leads to the happily ever after. So that was definitely what I was aiming for with Willa and Grady.
Well, that's good. I find that when I'm reading and one of the people is too perfect, I start looking for like how they're not perfect. It's really weird. I get really nitpicky, like, fine, she's grumpy and he's always happy, but there's something wrong with him. Like it's well, I guess in real life I've never met anyone that's like 100%
right.
perfect. So You gotta infuse that in there. It worked really well, I felt like, because they helped each other a lot, but also um, because they challenged each other. It
Mm-hmm.
became an issue of like each of them having to kind of work through things that they might have been able to ignore a lot longer if the
Yeah.
other person wasn't there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So life might have been a lot more comfortable.
Yeah. But then you have no story. It's interesting when I think when I first got into trying to write romance, I don't know that I really understood that writing romance isn't about getting two people together. It's about keeping them apart for 325 pages or whatever it is. Like that's the bigger challenge. It's easy to write like love scenes and everything's great and awesome, and it's what do these people need to overcome in order to be together? Like that's your challenge in writing.
Yeah, well, and in this story, because Willa has that rule where she's only going to have 2 dates, um, it's kind of different even for a romance novel that she meets him and has a connection and is like, well, I better make the most of these 2 dates. So they actually are physically together sooner than maybe in a
Yeah.
story with different characters they might have been, but emotionally and um, in other ways, their intimacy takes longer because she's so
Hmm.
unwilling to let him in, and um, he seems like he wants to like work on stuff from the beginning, but then there's certain things that when she like pushes those buttons, it also kind of gets his hackles up. It seems it seems really realistic, and for a contemporary book like I feel like that's important that you can see how people might be that way.
Yeah, I was actually when I wrote, not to give too much away, but like they sleep together fairly early in the book, and like you said, it's not there's a level of intimacy, but not like next level intimacy. And when I remember writing that and being like, oh, I think my editor might cut this because it's like maybe a little too soon, and people are going to be judgy about the heroine making that choice. Of course, they never judge the hero for making that choice, but I digress. But yeah, she didn't cut it, and I was pleased that scene got to stay in there, and yeah, because it was pretty important to the showing that she knew what she wanted, she went after it, but there was kind of this next level of intimacy and relationships that she wasn't going to go anywhere near, and that was something that she needed to work on. So
Yeah, she was, I felt like somebody who was very protective of herself in some ways. Um, it was good that she had friends, but I
yeah.
think even for them, there were certain things that she was like um, not willing to reveal about herself and not willing to really to let them in some parts of their life. So I felt like trust was like a big deal for her. Whereas with Grady, like he didn't seem to have an issue kind of befriending people or letting people get to know him, but it was like, don't talk about anything in the future. Like we can talk about today and tomorrow maybe, but definitely not next week. Like um it was super interesting.
Yeah.
So finding a compromise between someone who's like very much a long-term planner and I imagine that for him it would have felt special for her to let him in, to like let him be her person,
Hmm.
but it came with a lot of things that I feel like he didn't like at all.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah, it was, I mean, it was kind of interesting writing that contrast of like somebody who just wants to live in the moment and he doesn't want to think about the future because there might not be a future, and that's pretty scary. And
yeah,
for her, having grown up, not to give too much away, but she had a lot of challenging things in her childhood that made her want to, like, I want security, I want all of these things that I didn't have growing up. So it's not like she's just randomly neurotic. She has reasons for wanting to plan everything to the nth degree, and for desperately needing that financial security she never had. So
right.
yeah.
And you do kind of reveal things in bits to some degree. Like you touch on a lot of um, you touch on a lot as far as like her baggage is heavy. Like, I mean, she's got like poverty and I think insecurity as far like maybe even food insecurity to some degree, and kind of mental health, like kind of straddling kind of mental health issues and addiction issues and all kinds of things that she's had to deal with on some level, probably for a very long time. And it's, to me, I guess even now, like it's unclear if she let anybody really know everything that was going on with her
Mm-hmm.
for the most part. Like she seemed very careful for people not to see her soft spots, if that
Yeah.
makes any sense. And
Well,
it
and
felt like
definitely, yeah, there was a lot of vulnerability in, you know, growing up the way that she grew up, and yeah, being made fun of, being, you know, being an outcast, having just so many things that separated her. So even she's got the close girlfriends in the story, but even they have never been completely let in. So it was a big deal for her to expose her soft underbelly to Grady, so to speak.
yeah. Well, and then for him, it's kind of funny because like for a lot of the book, for me anyway, as I'm reading it, I'm thinking like, oh, well, he's got a good job, he's got his family, like his life is together. But then it's like, well, he is kind of funny about this, or you know, like there's some stuff where you're like, what's okay, I guess we can deal with that. So yeah, it was I think in the end too, like not for the end of the book, but like in the end it came to people, both of them being able to make compromises and being able to really work together to I guess build a life, a present and a possible future that would work for both of them.
Mm-hmm.
And it was it was nice to see like the way that you brought in family and friends, and even the parts of their lives for both of them, even the parts of their lives that like weren't ideal, were still like building blocks, I guess, for them to be able to figure it all out, which was I thought it was really nice. It was nicely done. I don't always see that when I'm reading romance, is where like the ugly bits are also helpful in some way.
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Yeah, they're definitely a couple of the more complicated characters I've had the pleasure of writing. So
yeah. Did you start off like thinking I'm going to write these people that are going to have a lot of layers, or did they just get more
so I think
complicated
of
as
it,
it?
I think a little ass backwards, and this is probably my journalism background. I usually will think of like a career or something that is interesting to me, like, ooh, smoke jumpers. I want to learn about smoke jumpers. And so
Yeah.
there's a air base out pretty close to my house. So I went out there and just like spent the day interviewing, got to weird little side note tangent. The dude on the cover, handsome
Yeah.
smoke jumpery guy, looks eerily like one of the guys that I spent quite a while with interviewing, and he was like showing me how the, you know, this is the plane and this is how we get our gear on quick and all this stuff, and really handsome, smoldering gaze kind of guy. And I had actually sent the photos to my editor, just like, hey, look at this good looking dude I got to interview. And they swear that there was no connection, like the cover model doesn't intentionally look like that guy, but he looks just like him. So that's a little freaky, but
Sure. It was just something that happened.
yes. But so yeah, I spent time interviewing and just gathering information, and usually that's kind of where stories start to be born out of for me, like just asking a lot of questions about the profession. And I think that's where I started to learn, like, oh, there's a lot of instability in this job. Yes, it's risky and daring, and I mean, to jump out of planes into burning forests for a living, it's a sketchy, scary profession. And you know, just learning about the kind of the transient nature of it, that you typically, these guys will work there, or some gals will work you know, the US fire season, and they get to the end of that and get maybe a little bit of a break, and then immediately will go somewhere like Australia or New Zealand, where their seasons are the opposite, and they'll work that season. So they're traveling constantly. And a lot of what the older guys were telling me too is like, back in the day, you didn't get any time off. Like you'd go 4 or 5 months without seeing your family at all.
Wow.
And they've changed it up a little bit to where they get some time off. But that was, one of the things that came into the story was Grady's dad was a smoke jumper, and kind of explaining, don't do some of the things that I did, don't make some of the choices that I did.
Yeah.
But so that was kind of where, okay, I want to write about smoke jumpers. I've done this research. And then it actually started to kind of the setup, the whole 2-date rule idea, was I met with my agent in a bar in Colorado during RWA Nationals, and we kind of, over a couple beers, brainstormed the idea of the 2-date rule thing. And I think we both started, early on, we both kind of liked the idea of a heroine who grew up like extremely poor. And I grew up with a lot of money, so I will admit I've got a lot of issues with money and hoarding, and like everything I own is came from a thrift store, and like I'm a super budget conscious cheapskate.
Yeah.
So definitely that was a trait that I latched onto, and I'm like, yeah, I can definitely write this thing pretty knowledgeably. So yeah, putting those two things together, somebody who has this super risky career, has a challenging time planning for the future, and somebody who needs that security of financial stability and planning for the future. And so yeah, thinking through the idea of let's throw these two characters together and see what happens.
Did you, so you did the research for the smoke jumper before the book was written?
Before the book was even contracted, yeah.
Okay, so that was kind of the first germ of the, yeah. But then once you figured out that Willa, kind of who she was going to be, did you end up having to do any research for her as far as like for her background or for any of her, because she does have some pretty strong reactions to some of the challenges that she faces as the book goes on?
Mm-hmm. A lot of them, yeah, some of the mental health stuff definitely required some research. The alcoholism stuff that she deals with her dad, I actually had another book years ago called Let It Breathe, that was based very much in that world. I have a cousin who's a psychiatrist specializing in rehab, so I had already done a lot of research for that previous book, that I kind of knew enough to write knowledgeably about that, and I could fill in the gaps with online research for things that I had questions about. But yeah, so that was I love coming from a journalism background. The research is always that's a fun thing for me to do. I'm kind of a junkie for that.
Well, it was super, I mean, it was interesting because there's some things that you don't like quite name, like this is 100% what's happening. But once we meet her family, it is very clear, like exactly what the issues were with her parents, and kind of even though we don't live through like on page the arc of what happened, we still like very clearly kind of see how their life kind of fell apart.
Yeah.
And I thought, I mean, that must have taken that's not something that you could just pull out of the air. Right. I would imagine, because it's sensitive topics, and people who are reading it may work in those fields or be or maybe even have some of those things in their background. You'd want to I feel like lately too there's been a lot of talk about like making sure that you approach those subjects with like the nuance and sensitivity that somebody who maybe has that in their background would need to be able to read it. Yeah. But since you come from a journalism background, I guess that helps as far as knowing where to look and how to approach those.
It does. I mean, yeah, yes, you can learn a lot of things online, but I think because I come from that background, I'm super comfortable just like, introducing myself to all these smoke jumpers and hanging out at the airbase and asking questions and showing up with my notepad. And like, I've got just stacks and stacks of notepads from research projects over the years of just, I want to know everything about your job. And I'll usually ask like, tell me some interesting stories, or tell me, putting people at ease and getting them to talk to me. Like there are a lot of little anecdotes in the book. I think there was a reference about two characters who met, like somebody was a volunteer who drove to the pickup site to pick somebody up, and it might have been how Grady's parents met, and that was legit how one of the smoke jumpers' parents met too. His
cool.
mom was a volunteer who showed up at the pickup point, and yeah, the rest was history. So lots of little details like that came from real examples of the folks that I interviewed out there.
That's awesome. So you said that with some of Willa's background that like you were able to pull from research that you'd done before, and then the smoke jumper, like that seems like a lot of information to gain. Do you think that you'll ever write a character who works, like maybe not a smoke jumper necessarily, but that works kind of in that world?
Well, so it's a series. This was book one in a series, although I write all my series books as standalone, so I've got a number of series that you can jump in at any point, and the stories will be, yeah, you won't have any trouble following along. So the next one, I actually just turned it in a week ago to my editor, is Grady's friend in the book, Tony, and and Willa's friend, Kayla. So they date briefly in the book, and they split up.
Yeah, they said they were better friends than I thought. I thought that you were just like, no, this is over, goodbye.
I love second chance romance stories, so that's where I wanted to go with this one, and like dig a little deeper into, okay, why did these two actually split up, and what do they really want? And
are we going to learn that it wasn't really amicable, because everyone seemed so okay with the situation?
So the set, I won't give too much away, but the basic setup is like Tony's got this history of dating women. All the breakups are always just like the best of friends. They stay best friends and all that. So and he and Kayla have, this takes place about a year later. He and Kayla have continued to be BFFs and hang out. And then one night he confesses to her that after a few shots of Fireball whiskey, that he actually does desperately want a long-term relationship and marriage and kids and all this stuff. And he can't totally figure out why he can't seem to get there and why it never seems to happen for him. And so she proposes a road trip where they go and interview all of his exes, because he's still great friends with all of them. So let's go right to the source. Let's find out what these women, will say about why did you really break up? And she's a photographer, so she's also on this road trip photographing burned out forests from previous fires, because it's part of a coffee table book that she's doing. So cool. It's a road trip book, but it's also just the like, let's interview all the exes together and get to the root of your issues, buddy. And that was
hilarious.
There's a lot of good setup for comedy. Like, these women are just given permission to diss their ex to his face, and some of them have kind of shitty things to say, and some of them have very sweet, enlightening things to say, and some of them are just plain kooky. So,
did you ever watch The Big Bang Theory?
Uh-uh.
There is an episode there, because one of the characters is like unlucky in love through kind of the whole series, and they have an episode where they like sit all the exes down, and they're like, okay, we're gonna figure out how you broke up, or why, like why you can't find a woman. So, which, I mean, it's not the same, but it did make for kind of a funny, where he's like, I thought I was being helpful, and he had one girlfriend who had like social anxiety, and he kept like putting her into like situations that made her super uncomfortable. And he was like, no, I thought it was, like he just thought he was being friendly. And she was like, I crawled out a bathroom window to get away from, like it was interesting. So now, when does this book come out? Because
I'm not positive. I think it comes out in July was what I heard last, but I kind of never know. I should know. And then that's book 2 in the series, and book 3 I do know comes out in January of 2021. So.
If you're hearing noises, it's my dog. I'm sorry.
Oh.
She's like outside, but she is like groaning. So, sorry.
That's all right.
So you said book 2, July, and then book 3, is that going to be Grady's third friend who like had the date he forgot about, or the anniversary he forgot about?
No, this will be one that you don't meet you meet him in book 2. too.
Okay.
You'll meet both characters. So, and neither is a smoke jumper. The guy owns a air tanker company, the giant planes that drop retardant on fires. So
Uh-huh.
that's his role, and the heroine in that one is a nurse that you'll meet in the second book.
Just all new people.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, thanks. That gives me lots to look forward to. But actually, Megan had read your books before, but this one was new to me. So I was super excited to get to know your writing. And, it's always good to have something fun that kind of makes you laugh while you're reading it. But I was really impressed too by like the way you were able to weave in kind of more serious topics. And like, I mean, there was some stuff that I'm like, this could have been really angsty if you really had gone, like if you'd gone in that direction, it could have been a whole other thing. But yeah, it made me think that you must be somebody who likes to look for the silver linings because
this is true. Yeah. Well, like I said in that story about my book deal and cat dying, and like, there's always, even in the worst, awfulest situations, you can usually find some measure of humor to lighten things up. I'm not like cracking jokes at funerals or anything, but yeah, there's always, I like finding the humor in unusual places, or those moments of levity in things that are otherwise kind of gritty.
Yeah, no, that's it was a really good surprise for me. When we were talking before we started recording, you told me that you have a cat who is a thief. So I would like you to tell everyone about this because
he's actually, you can see. Yeah, hi. So yeah, Willa's pet, and other pieces of this story stolen from my life. Willa's pets. She has all these quirky animals that have, they're all rescues, and they all have different unusual stories. So I also have a lot of weird pets. I have 5 cats and 2 dogs, and this one. Hi. Oof. So people who follow me on social media are familiar with Matt the Cat's Stolen Goods Report. I post pretty regularly. So this is Matt the Cat. And when he was an indoor-outdoor cat, he used to actually go around the neighborhood. Like, he'd break into people's houses through their pet doors and steal stuff, rolls of toilet paper, or he broke into a daycare, and I woke up one morning to 35 hand puppets strewn up my driveway. He got a wallet with money in it once. Gloves are his favorite. He dragged a pair of men's size 12 flip-flops over a fence once. I mean, I'd wake up to weird stuff trapped in my cat door.
He brought you both the shoes?
He did. He would always bring both shoes. He would go back for the other. There were also, so I didn't mention this earlier, but there are some really eerie moments. Like there was one kind of just benign one where I was talking about wanting pizza for dinner, and within an hour he drags a pizza coupon through the cat door. No idea where he got it. Another time, kind of a darker one, was I was going through a divorce or breakup with my then husband, and kind of at a loss for what to do, and what is this headed to divorce, or what's going, and Matt the Cat dragged a set of page out of a divorce document through the cat door window. That was just...
So Matt the Cat can read is what you're telling me.
Oh, there's another. So now he's strictly an indoor cat now. We have like a catio he can go out on, but he mostly steals stuff around the house. But the weirdest one in recent memory was my husband and I were getting ready for bed, and I was like, hey, are you going downstairs? Could you please grab my Kindle out of my purse? And he's like, no, I wasn't going to go back downstairs. Okay, no big deal. So I wake up in the morning, and my Kindle, still in its case, is lying on the floor at the foot of the bed. And I'm like, okay, Craig must have done that to be funny or something like that. So as soon as he woke up, I was like, did you bring my Kindle up here and get it on my purse and drag it up the stairs? And then he's like, no. So Matt the Cat got into my purse, which was in a coat closet, somehow pulled the Kindle in its case out, dragged it up an entire flight of stairs, across the living room, up the flight of stairs, into our bedroom, and left it at the foot of the bed.
Wow. So I'm impressed, but also slightly afraid of Matt the Cat now.
Yeah, he's a little bit unusual. He's a polydactyl. 2 of our 5 are polydactyls. They have the extra toes on on there. One's Luna, who's behind my computer. No, actually, Luna's sleeping over there next to Jack.
Oh.
Luna's Polly on both front and back toes. Matt the cat is only Polly on his front paws.
The polydactyls have extra, but it's like a thumb, right?
Yeah, Luna. Hi, Luna. Luna's got 3 extras on one toe, or on one hand, one paw. 3 extras on the front, 2 extras on this, and then just 1 extra on each back. Matt the cat. Does he have just Maddie? I think Maddie's only got the 1, but he's got really massive fluffy paws, so it looks like
maybe that's what helps him grab all these things.
Yeah, I mean, our local paper did an article about it once, and they talked about, made a lot of jokes about the 5-finger discount.
That's funny. Were you able to get the wallet back to its owner, or was it?
Yeah, so I used to have to post pictures. Like I post side posters up on the mailboxes of like, this is everything he's stolen this week. Sorry, call me and I'll bring your stuff back to you.
Wow.
He would frequently, there was a neighbor behind us that had a big trampoline that their kids would play on. And it was, the kid had like taken his wallet out and set it next to the trampoline while he was jumping. So that's what it was. It was a kid's wallet, but it had like $12 in it or something.
That's enough.
Yeah. Well, and it was, again, another eerie, like, we used to always joke, Maddie was always bringing stuff home. I'm like, Matt, why don't you get a wallet? And then one day he shows up with a wallet. And I was like, oh, what do I do with this?
Like, no more suggestions.
Yeah.
Do your kids have fun with that?
Yeah, I think the other thing that's a little bit annoying, I think, to them is when he is hunting around the house and bringing stuff upstairs, he has this loud yowl that he does the entire time he's coming up the stairs with his mouth full of napkin or gloves or whatever he's stolen.
It's
like,
oh,
Maddie's stealing again.
That's funny. Not a good cat. I thought cat burglars were quiet, but I guess this one is not.
He wants everyone to know about his finds.
That's funny. Well, I guess we've talked about your book and your upcoming projects and your thief in your house. Where can people find you if they are looking for more information?
TawnaFenske.com, TAWNA. Yeah, I guess.
So we've got you. We've got a link tree starting this month, and so we've got a link to your website on there. And so that's, you do have a newsletter, right? And then are you mostly active on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter? Or
Facebook tends to be my bigger platform. A little bit of Instagram, but I'm not very good at it yet. Some Twitter is kind of fun. And yeah, my newsletter. I used to blog daily, and that was just one of those things I kind of had to give up in favor of actually getting the books out. So I've got, my first book came out, will it be 10 years this summer or 9 years this summer? Anyway, I have like 30 some odd books out. So I've kept a pretty aggressive production schedule of like, lately it's been 4 to 5 books a year, but in order to do that, I had to cut out a few corners.
Well, I can't even say anything. I've yet to be published, but I'm very bad at blogging because it still takes up planning and time and yeah. It
used to be a bigger thing, like 8 years ago, everybody had a blog and it was a really good way to build a platform. Now it's a little less mandatory. I think people are more after the bite-sized content like you get on Instagram or Facebook.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. Well, it was lovely having you. I really enjoyed that we were able to read your book this month.
Thank you so much.
We'll look for the next one in July. I definitely want to see this girlfriend road trip. It's funny because then it's like they're using all their research skills to get an answer. So that's going to be fun, and come back anytime. We really enjoyed having you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for reading the book and saying nice things about it, and for having me on.
Thanks. All right, I'm gonna